Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something of a silent, high-stakes countdown that's unfolding right now in Kathmandu.
Right, behind closed doors in the boardrooms of these huge legacy conglomerates.
Exactly. We're talking about Nepal's oldest business houses, the ones that really form the backbone of the economy. And they're facing what might be their most existential challenge yet, the transition of power.
It really is an inflection point. Our mission today is to, look past the day-to-day business news and analyze the structural mechanics of how wealth gets destroyed.
Specifically at that G2 to G3 transition.
Yes, the shift from the second generation to the third. We need to get our heads around why this moment is so predictable, yet for so many, so incredibly difficult to get right.
And you can't talk about this without mentioning the brutal proverb that hangs over every single family fortune on the planet.
Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
It sounds like an old wives' tale, but the numbers, the actual statistics are just chillingly real.
Oh, they are. They confirm it. Global research shows that a staggering 70% of family businesses don't even make it past the second generation.
70%.
But the real cliff face, the place where most fall, is G3. A full 90% of these enterprises are gone by the time the third generation is supposed to take over.
Gone meaning what? Sold off, broken up?
Liquidated, sold for parts, or just fragmented so badly they cease to be a coherent entity. And get this, only a tiny 3% make it to the fourth generation, with the family still in control.
And this is where it gets really interesting in the Nepali context, especially as we look towards, say, 2030. For these massive business houses, the biggest threat they face isn't some new competitor.
No, it's not external at all.
It's internal. It's this unstructured, emotionally loaded transition of power. So today, we're going to distill this all down to 2 key strategic imperatives, the things they absolutely must do to survive.
If you're watching Nepal's corporate landscape or, even managing a wealth transfer in your own family, this deep dive is, I think, essential. We're really looking at a race against entropy itself.
Okay, let's unpack that. Why is this third-gen curse, as they call it, so predictable? I mean, why does that ambition, that wealth, seem to decay so reliably?
It's all about the dilution of the original driving force. You can almost chart it out. Let's start with G1, the founder.
The patriarch.
The patriarch or matriarch. They had this singular, often autocratic vision. They built everything in an environment of, scarcity.
Well,
And because of that, they had what you could call entrepreneurial muscle memory.
an instinct for risk?
An instinct for risk, a relentless work ethic, the willingness to, sleep on the factory floor because failure meant total ruin. They were navigating a really difficult landscape.
Okay, so that's G1. What about G2?
G2, the stewards. They often come in during a period of, let's say, stabilization. They're often Western educated, and their focus is on expansion, on professionalizing things.
So they're the ones who took the original trading house and diversified into manufacturing or hydropower or banking.
Exactly. And they are the critical link. They're critical because they still understand that original vision. They lived in the founder's shadow. They know what the struggle felt like.
But the real danger, the explosion point, that's G3.
Yes, G3 inherits the wealth, but crucially, they don't inherit the struggle. They're born into comfort, often very disconnected from that foundational story of survival.
And the ownership structure changes.
It fragments completely. What was one person's vision, G1's single ownership, is now fractured across maybe a dozen or more cousins. The probability of conflict just goes up exponentially. Their goals, their risk appetites, they all diverge.
Hold on, isn't that a little unfair to G3?
Yeah.
I mean, they're often inheriting a much more complex business, maybe with a lot of legacy debt, a huge workforce. Why is it all their fault?
It's not about blame. It's about structural mechanics. The focus, you see, it fundamentally shifts. It shifts from wealth creation to wealth distribution. When you have 20 different principles, the main driver becomes, how do I maximize my personal return today, not how do we build the empire for the next 100 years? That is the mechanism of decay.
And in Nepal, the country's own history makes this problem even worse. G1, the founders, they often thrived in a protected economy, right? Where political connections were key.
That's the key nugget right there. G1's model often prioritized, let's be frank, rent-seeking over pure operational efficiency. But G3 faces a totally different world.
A hyper-competitive globalized market.
Precisely. Their competitors aren't just the family business down the street anymore. They're sophisticated Indian conglomerates, state-backed Chinese firms, agile tech startups. That old model of just leveraging political connections, it's completely insufficient.
So survival today demands meritocracy.
It demands meritocracy, which is in direct conflict with a system where leadership is determined by birthright. That's the fundamental clash.
Okay, so if that's the mechanism of decay, what's the solution? What's the first strategic imperative they have to get right?
Well, if you look at the patterns of failure, the single most common, most damaging strategic error is confusing ownership with management.
The idea that just because your last name's on the building, you're qualified to be the CEO.
That assumption is the most direct path to destroying value. It's a fatal flaw.
So the family has to shift its thinking. They have to stop seeing themselves as a family business, where a cousin runs every single division.
And start seeing themselves as a family-owned business. It's a crucial pivot. The family governs the asset, they set the grand strategy, but professionals, world-class professionals, run the day-to-day operations.
And if they don't decouple those two roles...
Then they run straight into the classic principal-agent problem.
Okay, explain that for us, maybe with an analogy.
Sure. Imagine the entire G3 family, all the cousins, are the owners of a massive container ship. They're the principals. Their entire collective wealth is tied up in that ship sailing successfully.
Okay.
Now, if the captain of that ship, the CEO, the agent, is chosen not because he's the best navigator, but just because he happens to be the eldest cousin.
Right.
Yeah, then every time he makes a mistake, every wrong turn, he's not just hurting himself, he's damaging the collective wealth of every single family shareholder.
So the incentives get completely misaligned. That cousin CEO might be more interested in protecting his own job or his branch of the family than maximizing the return for everyone.
Exactly. And that creates this bitter, corrosive resentment that eventually just tears the whole thing apart from the inside. Decoupling is the only answer.
So if the G3 cousins aren't running the cement factory or the bank day to day, what is their new role? It sounds like their job moves from the corner office up to the boardroom.
Their job becomes governance and strategic oversight. We can break it down into 4 key areas the family absolutely must control.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, they set the long-term vision. They define the acceptable risk appetite for the entire enterprise. Second, they appoint a world-class professional CEO and leadership team. And I mean through a rigorous, proper search.
Not just picking a friend.
Absolutely not. Third, and this is critical, they hold that team rigorously accountable using hard performance metrics.
And you've mentioned return on equity, ROE, as being the key metric here. Why that one specifically?
Because ROE forces a professional CEO to think like an owner. It measures how efficiently the CEO is using the family's own capital, the equity they've invested, to generate profit. It shifts the focus from just, growing sales to creating smart, sustainable growth that actually makes the family richer.
Okay, so vision, hiring the CEO, holding them accountable. What's the fourth?
The family controls capital allocation. They make the big decisions. Which businesses do we double down on, and which assets is it time to sell?
The family controls the money and the destiny, but the professional runs the engine. And if a G3 member wants to be that professional...
They have to earn it. They have to compete for it. And we have a perfect model for this working in practice. The Tata Group in India. It's quintessentially family-owned through its philanthropic trusts, but its operating companies, TCS, Tata Motors, Tata Steel, they're all led by professional CEOs who were chosen through a global meritocratic search.
And the family's role?
The family exercises governance and stewardship through the holding company, Tata Sons. If a family member wants to be CEO of Tata Motors, they have to compete for that job on equal footing with the best candidates in the world. It completely changes the mindset from entitlement to merit.
That makes the strategic logic incredibly clear. So decoupling is the goal. But how do you enforce that when you've got 20 cousins who all disagree? And that, I assume, brings us to the second imperative.
Forging the family constitution. This is the vaccine against the curse. You see, an unwritten set of rules based on the whims of an aging patriarch, that just doesn't work with a fragmented G3.
So this is a formal, written document.
It's a pre-negotiated peace treaty for future conflicts. It legally codifies the relationship between the family, their wealth, and the business itself.
That sounds simple on the surface, but I imagine drafting it is incredibly hard. It forces everyone to confront the most sensitive topics head-on. What are the non-negotiable parts?
There are 3. Component A, the first one, has to be the entry and exit rules for family employment. This is where you draw that hard line between bloodline and competence.
Making a job a privilege, not a birthright.
Precisely. You need strict minimum qualifications. For example, you might require a master's degree from a top-tier university plus 5 years of proven work experience outside the family business.
Wow, that's emotional engineering right there, telling your own child they have to go prove their worth to strangers for 5 years before they can even apply.
It's profoundly difficult, but it's necessary. And, just as important, the Constitution has to specify how you manage or even terminate a non-performing family employee. You need a process to remove a failing cousin without causing a family civil war.
Okay, so that handles merit. What about the money? Component B.
Component B is the compensation and dividend philosophy. This is all about preventing resentment. Family members who work in the business get paid a market rate salary, period. It's benchmarked against industry standards. No inflated family salaries.
Because if you pay an underperforming cousin twice what a high-performing professional gets.
The professional will leave, and your business will collapse from the inside out.
And this also addresses the big fight between taking cash out now versus reinvesting for the future, right?
Exactly. The Constitution must have a clear dividend policy. How much profit is reinvested for growth versus how much is distributed to shareholders. This stops that debilitating annual battle between the cousins who want cash for their lifestyle and the ones who want to build for the long term.
And finally, you need a structure to handle all the inevitable human drama.
Component C, the governance and dispute resolution mechanism. This is the internal rule of law. You establish a family council, which is completely separate from the corporate board of directors.
So the family council is like the parliament of the owners.
That's a great way to put it. It's where they argue about family matters, philanthropy, G4's education, who gets the holiday home. And critically, it unifies the family's voice so they present a single, cohesive front to the corporate board.
So individual cousins can't just call up the CEO and interfere.
It stops that completely. And for the really big disputes, the Constitution has to outline a clear process. It might start with internal mediation and escalate all the way to binding arbitration. The single most important goal is keeping family fights out of public courtrooms.
Because that's when the damage becomes irreparable.
It's a survival imperative.
So let's bring this all together. What does this mean for the corporate landscape in Nepal as we look toward 2026? It sounds like a dramatic reshaping is coming.
We really see two very different, very divergent scenarios playing out. The first, and unfortunately more common path, is the great fragmentation.
What does that look like?
It's where the majority of these families fail to professionalize. They get bogged down in disputes, paralysis sets in, and value is destroyed. This leads to massive fire sales of their best assets, the land, the factories, the licenses.
And you can be sure someone is waiting to buy.
Oh, absolutely. Agile domestic firms, global private equity, and most notably, Indian and Chinese competitors who are patiently waiting to pick up strategic assets at a discount. The result is a hollowing out of domestic industrial capital.
Okay, so that's the grim scenario. What's the optimistic path?
The second scenario is the professionalized dynasty. This is a small but influential group of families who actually get this right. They implement the Constitution, they decouple ownership and management.
What do they become?
Their holding companies evolve into sophisticated family offices. Their operating companies, run by top-tier CEOs, not only survive but thrive. They attract international capital, they compete regionally, and they become new engines of sustainable growth for the country.
The hard truth here seems to be that the logic is easy, but the execution is incredibly difficult.
It is. It requires what we called emotional engineering. The current generation has to voluntarily limit their own children's automatic access to power. They have to shift their entire identity from, I run the business, to, my family owns a portfolio of assets managed by the best people we can find.
And changing that core psychological identity, that has to be the highest hurdle of all, putting the enterprise before the ego.
Indeed. And that's the final thought for you to consider. The ultimate legacy of these great patriarchs and matriarchs won't be just the size of the fortune they leave behind. It will be the quality of the governance structures they build today to ensure that wealth survives for the next century. Because if they don't, that 90% failure rate will become the dramatic and very public reality for much of Nepal's corporate foundation.